I do remember though, like several months back when I finally changed the settings on my Twitter account, so I only got notifications from from interactions from people I follow on Twitter, and and thinking that it was like one of those scenes in a movie where like the like telepath is like just learning to control their powers, and like finally the babble of voices in their head finally stops, you know.
You did mention Angela Nagle, your fellow Zero Books author,
yes.
And also you mentioned it in regards to identity politics and how it's sort of discussed on the left. You mentioned Nagle's take on the idea of focusing on the economic over cultural issues. And I guess the area of tension that it's an area of tension that I've had personally, because I came up in the very sort of liberal left Black identity scene. And I was privy to a lot of the cynicism and just awfulness. I don't even know what other type of word to use, but just privy to some of the cynicism, awfulness, and also sort of a lack of systemic analysis within that constituency, which kind of led me to the point where I sort of rejected that mode completely. But I didn't necessarily see it as rejecting cultural issues, because I see the economic as being linked to the cultural, in the sense that I don't see Black struggle as being separate from class struggle. I think that there are, in my opinion, and this is probably my piss poor take, so please don't cancel me. In my opinion, there are material basis for a lot of the things that, and I mean some of the things that you even mentioned as cultural struggles, the Irish resistance movement, also the Black civil rights movement, India as well. I don't see those as being quote unquote cultural just because they have people from different ethnicities or cultural backgrounds attached to it. I see those as being material struggles. So any Marxist or anybody who calls themselves a socialist or anti-capitalist in their right minds isn't going to look at those things as cultural issues. And I guess I had more of a charitable reading of what Angela Nagle said, in the sense that she was talking about focusing on the things that materially empower people rather than being engaged in this endless spectacle of culture war, which is really a liberal project if you think about it. And I do understand that grievance of wanting to put aside the culture war bullshit in favor of the stuff that, like, I know you found our Joe Rogan intro funny, and the Joe Rogan intro was, people yelling at Bernie Sanders, calling him a transphobe, and him being like, well, I want to fucking, increase the minimum wage. It's kind of that thing where I do understand that mode, but as soon as you sort of mention it, people sort of automatically get their heckles up and suspect that you are encouraging the ignoring of like minorities and their plights, even though those are intrinsically linked to economic struggle.
Yeah, so that's part of what I was trying to head off in the first chapter, because I was hoping that if somebody is sort of coming into the book being prepared to hate it, not that this will stop them from hating it, right? But
you want the plausible deniability,
but that this could at least be like okay, hold on, right? Like before you totally make up your mind about this, let me establish that I do actually have quite a bit of common ground with you, right? Like I'm not like this sort of idea that some people have in their head of some like totally like class reductionist.
I hate that term. I hate that term so much.
Yeah,
I can't stand it.
Yeah, and so say like if you suspect that this is where I'm going with it, I'm not, right? I agree with you about all of these issues, right? I just think that like that doesn't mean that I don't think we should like lighten up about all the ephemera, because I think that like not lightening up all the ephemera harms our ability to fight at all these fronts, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And I agree that that a lot of these things, obviously do have economic dimensions, that that there are in a great many cases, right? Well, I mean, clearly in a case like British colonialism in India, like that's maybe one of the more.
There's an obvious economic underpinning to that.
Right. There's an obvious economic.
Same thing with Black civil rights struggle. Same thing with, you could argue, like discrimination in housing and employment against like gay and trans and LGBT people. These things are sort of not culture war narratives. These are economic disenfranchisements of certain
headline grabbing issues. There are they?
They're sort of economic ways that people are suffering under capitalism based on where they are in relation to the hegemonic ideal in that regard. So I guess because that's how I view things, and people call me a class reductionist all the time, simply because I
Red Brown Alliance.
Peter, you're gonna get us in so much fucking trouble.
They like that. One.
It's kind of.
So I think that's one good response on its own is just to say, well, even if we are only interested in economic issues, these things are economic. I think another good response is to say that that the sort of traditional calculation made by the socialist left is that bigotry is bad because it keeps working class people disunited, right? And then
exactly.
And then I think, but then I even think a third legitimate response is like, look, even if there might be some individual cases where some of these things, it's not obvious what the economic tie-in is. I don't know why anybody would be like interested in socialism in the first place if they didn't have a certain kind of like, egalitarian instinct against treating people badly, because of like, of things they have no control over or whatever, right? Like that's so I mean, like it's if you didn't have a problem with that, why would you object to capitalism in the first place?
Exactly.
I don't know. Maybe people could just work harder.
Right, exactly.
Bootstrap yourself. All that.
Exactly. And I do think, to be fair, I mean, maybe I should shorten, because right now it doesn't come until a few chapters later. But I do later on quote a line from Angela Nagle where from one of the interviews she gave about Kill All Normies, where she does strike. Where she does say something that's much more in line with the charitable interpretation you gave before, right? So she basically says, it was in that little chapter about normies, which is another one of these things that's like,
how dare you talk to those normal people?
Not that I expect this to stop, to stop anybody from misrepresenting, what the book's about, because anybody who wants to do that is going to do that, and that's one of the risks that you're taking writing about.
I'm going to do it immediately.
Fair enough. But I did want it to be like right out there, unmistakably in its own chapter, that like, hey, so like there's just no room for doubt about it, that like it's super explicit. Because I think one of the things Angela Nagle actually, like, I think one of the tactical mistakes she might have made in Kill All Normies was that there were a lot of parts of the argument she was making that were just kind of implied. So it was really easy for people who wanted to interpret things in bad faith ways to do that. I mean, I do have some.
I know all about that.
Yeah.
I've read that book, A, and B, I tend to imply things. So
sure. But like, I wanted to be totally unmistakable. It's like, hey, here's the chapter on normies. Make it clear when I talk about like appealing to normal people or regular people or normies or whatever, I don't mean people who are, white, cis, male, blah, 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 right? Like, that's not it.
But that's the dictionary definition, Ben. Like when I open up the dictionary and look up the word normies, it means cishet white man.
Same with Bernie Bros.
Yeah, Bernie Bros. It's a synonym for Bernie Bros.
Yeah, it just means anybody of like, whatever race, gender, sexual orientation, sexual identity, whatever other subculture somebody might be part of, anybody who's not immersed in the political subculture of the left. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's it.
Yeah, or not just that. For me, the word normie connotates like anybody who isn't like part of the capitalist class. Like anyone who has to sell.
Yeah, that's how I view the word normie. As a normal person or normie or whatever.
Yeah, that's how I view the word normie. If you're not part of the capitalist class, then to me, you are the people that we're trying to sort of get on our side.
You're the people.
Yeah. But then I guess moving on from Nagle and that sort of cultural aspect of things, there was also the idea that you put forward about petty forms of bigotry. Mm-hmm. And here's Angie Speaks' naughty take about that.
Sure.
And I say this as a Black woman who is like pretty much, there's no day where I don't experience some form of microaggression, even from the white man in my house, Jake Fields,
Shush.
even from the white man that I have brought into my bed, even him. I'm just kidding.
It's all banter, mate. It's all banter. I'll take the hood back if you don't like it.
Jesus Christ. Jesus. See what I have to put up
That's
with?
a microaggression, Jake.
That's a dude.
For shame.
Definitely not a joke.
You're canceled, Jake.
You're canceled, Jake. Get out of here. But yeah, like, okay, so we're talking about petty forms of bigotry, and like I said, there's no day that I don't experience some form of passive bigotry, whether that be through my interactions with other people or through consuming media. But at the same time, I'm not so narcissistically attached to my identity that I perceive everything everybody does as a slight. I do kind of leave reasonable doubt for. And I also know that I've done it to other people too. People who are from different identities, simply because of my ignorance or just lack of knowledge. I may have done something small to like offend somebody. But at the same time, I guess where I stand on the idea of passive forms of bigotry in that regard is that changing the material conditions is obviously the number one most important thing to empower people in order to have them be on like equal footing. But when it comes to the kind of wrongs of the human mind, I don't think the left is going to be able to right all of those wrongs. Of course, bigotry harms the left in all of its forms. It's something that hinders solidarity. But then again, bigotry is something that we all have to deal with and grapple with. And it's not even just racism, homophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, whatever. There's also bigotry when it comes to discrimination based on things like beauty standards. There's bigotry when there's things in terms of discrimination based on weight, based on a whole kind of list of preferences that are either conditioned or based on certain things that human beings find more attractive, whether that be symmetry or in terms of our weird selective shit that we use to choose the people we want to mate with, these sort of unconscious processes. I feel like there's a huge emphasis on trying to force those unconscious processes to work in different ways a lot quicker than that process is actually even capable of taking place. If you kind of get what I'm getting at, or if what I'm saying makes any sense.
When the Joe Rogan thing was happening, I co-wrote an article with Michael Brooks for Jacobin about this, where we kind of got into this. I think this issue in the last section.
This is one I read actually.
Okay, yeah. So in there, basically, we got into this in the last section about how, of course, the thing that we have the least control over is the bad, like just the thoughts that are going on in people's heads, right? Just the the attitudes that we hold about each other. And of course, this is going beyond what we said in the article, but of course, there's a limited extent to which we even should, right, want to correct that, not because a lot of the thoughts in people's heads aren't bad, but just because you want you want a society, you just have to recognize that there's only so much you can do about that, right? We're in the, as we're in the changing material conditions business, right? Not the not the reaching into people's heads and rearranging them to be more virtuous business. But look, to the extent that there are certain forms of bigotry, that obviously the world would be better if if we didn't have, and that would be that to the extent that we can do anything about it, that we should. I think history strongly suggests that one of the best strategies for helping people get past this stuff is to have different kinds of people work together for, a shared purpose.